Hello, everyone. Today's date is October 14th, 2021. I'm Joe Rapp, and this is today's Rapp Report. So, a lot of what I've been covering over the last 2 years now on various channels on YouTube has been talking about the coming collapse of the dollar. So, primarily, the thesis is that Bitcoin is this new form of money that exists in the world, and Bitcoin will ultimately dethrone the dollar as the reserve currency of the world. Now, in order for that to actually have happened, the dollar would have to go through some type of hyperinflationary event that depletes all of its value, loses consumers' confidence, and humans, you and I, would have to decide that we want to buy, hold, and save in Bitcoin instead of the US dollar. Well, as we've seen through the COVID pandemic last year, and even pre-COVID pandemic, the U.S. economy was fractioning, right? It was starting to slowly fall apart. The housing crisis of 2007, 2008 to 2009 is what kicked off the start of inflation, massive inflation by the Federal Reserve Bank. For those of you that may remember back then, it was the first time this term quantitative easing had been announced by the Fed. And essentially what happened after the housing crisis is the Federal Reserve decided to do something that the central bank had never done in its history of the United States, and that is create a large amount of new money to add into the overall circulating money supply with the hopes that it would help the economy recover from the crash and the global financial crisis. So over a 10-year period from about 2008 or 9, whenever QE1 started, going on 7 or 8 years over the last 10 years primarily, we've seen this massive amount of new money that's come into circulation, this massive amount of new inflation. And what they've told us this whole time is that inflation doesn't exist, right? But we've seen inflation in things like healthcare costs and things like education costs and things like housing costs. So the inflation was here before, all this really started. But now we're starting to see inflation really ramp up. So in today's episode, I'm primarily going to be talking about where the United States stands right now with inflation of the US dollar, what that means for your savings or your investments in US dollars, and we'll try to add some context in how you can start defending and preserving your wealth for the coming inflation. Because as more money is created, as more stimulus packages are created, all of those dollar bills that you see in your bank account or your wallets, you have to understand that those will start losing value. So instead of buying a loaf of bread for $3, you're going to have to buy a loaf of bread for $6. That loaf of bread is $6 now, and it's not necessarily because there's a shortage in them, which is happening as well in the economy right now, but it's because there's more money that was added to the overall circulating supply of all of our dollars. Therefore, everything that's priced in dollars naturally will raise up. But we're going to cut now to a couple latest news articles. And the first one that we're seeing here is that from Market Watch, right? Title is High Inflation to Last a While, Fed's Bullstick says, and it's no longer transitory. For those of you who have been following the news, what is the mantra? What is the narrative that we've heard out of the Federal Reserve Bank and Jerome Powell through 2021? As these stimulus packages are being created, $3.1 trillion, $3 trillion here, $3 trillion there. We've been told by the Fed over the last year or so that the inflation that we could see is transitory, meaning that the inflation that we're seeing, they're admitting that we're seeing inflation, but it's transitory. It'll move on. It won't last, right? That was the narrative. But now, of course, as they were saying this, anyone that understands basic economics and understands how the system actually functions, you realize that this is not a transitory issue. This is a systemic issue that they're trying to cover up, that either they believe in what they're doing or they're just trying to push a narrative out to the public to try to not scare people. But ultimately, we knew it wasn't transitory. So here we have the Fed now admitting that the inflation that we're seeing is no longer transitory. So what else does Bostick says? It appears to break with other, so he appears to break with other Feds on how quickly U.S. inflation rate will last, right? All right. So let's see what he says here, right? And here you see Fed Chairman Powell insists for months the increase was transitory, large reflection. All right, so What does this mean now? So now the Federal Reserve Bank is admitting that the inflation that we're seeing around society is no longer transitory, meaning that it's not going to just be here for a short time. It's going to be here for a longer time than expected. So what does that mean? What is inflation again? The most basic way to understand what the term inflation really means is it's an addition of more money, more supply of the money, more units of the money into the overall supply of existing money, right? The way that money is supposed to function is that you're supposed to have close to a fixed amount. Bitcoin, for example, is considered a deflationary currency. It's a form of money where there's only 21 million whole units that exist in Bitcoin. That's all that will ever exist in Earth anytime, ever. 21 million whole units. You could break it down 100 million decimal places, which means 8 decimal places, and the single unit of a Bitcoin is 1 Satoshi, just like single unit of a dollar is 1 penny, right? So Bitcoin's considered a fixed supply of money. You also have low inflationary forms of money, which we've seen like gold and silver. These are forms of money in history where there's only so much gold that exists above ground, and the only way that more of that gold is added into the circulating supply of gold is if miners are digging it out of the ground, refining it, and then selling it for jewelry, precious metals, all this other stuff, right? So gold is an example of a low inflationary currency. Now, what we've seen now with the dollar is that the dollars, any paper money that exists around the world today, they're called fiat currencies. Okay, this form of money started in 1971 when Richard Nixon took us off the gold standard. So the world used to be on a gold standard. Gold was money. Gold was considered money. We broke away from that in 1971, and the only thing that dictates how much of a country's money supply is in circulation are the governments themselves, along with the central banks in that country. So what inflation is, it's the addition of more money or more units into the overall supply of the existing pool of money. What the Federal Reserve is doing now, when you hear about inflation, is these stimulus packages we've seen. The last one that they just created was over $3 trillion. What that means is that they created, out of thin air, with a click of a button, $3 trillion more dollars that got added into the overall supply of the existing money. Now, if you just look at like basic mathematics and you say, okay, if I have a piece of pie, right, and we slice that pie up into 10 slices of pie, and then we give it to 10 people, we all have 1/10 of a slice of pie, right? Now, let's just say, what happens if the baker comes up to you and the baker takes that same pie with our 10 slices in it and he puts it back together inside the pan, and then he cuts a couple more lines in there. Say he cuts 4 more slice lines in there, right? Now, you don't have 1/10 of that pie anymore. You have maybe 1/8, maybe 1/12, 1/14 of a slice. Your sliver of that overall pie got smaller. This is what inflation does. So as more money is added to the overall supply of the economy, as more money is added to the pie, as more slices are taken out of the pie, everyone that has an existing piece of that pie, all of our existing money, your dollars in your bank account, it gets devalued because now there's more units that are in existence. So this is inflation. This is how inflation works. And what happens is we're in a situation now where the way that the system's set up is that the inflation can't stop. Okay, that's very important to understand. So as more stimulus money is created, because all of these companies and governments are in debt, and the people, you and I, obviously this is a horrible economy right now, we need more social support. As more inflation is created, as more stimulus packages are created, costs of everything from goods and services increase, and unfortunately we're seeing a supply shortage right now as well, which isn't making things better. All right, and now I'm going to go back to the charts here. We'll take a look at a few more things. I like to show this chart quite a bit. I'm going to go ahead and move this over here to the side. Let me get that out of the way here. We'll go back this way. Perfect. All right, so what are we looking at here? And I'm going to shrink myself up a little bit more. It's a little bit small. Okay, perfect. So what you see here, this is a chart showing M2 money supply. So this is from the St. Louis Fed website, straight from the source. So what this chart represents is, you'll see the x-axis is years, so the year 2002 all the way up until present day, 2021. And then the y-axis is the amount of dollars in billions, so the amount of money in billions, right? So what this shows you is how much of the M2, and M2 represents the existing supply of money in circulation, whatever's out there, all the dollar bills that are out there, right? So and this is just simplified down. So what we can see here is that the blue line shows you as you go through 2004, 2006, 2008, you can see the increase in the amount of money that is created in circulation, right? We see 2008, the housing crisis. This gray area represents recessions. This is the dot-com bubble over here in 2000s. Here's the latest recession, the housing crisis. And we can see that once we hit that housing crisis mark, M2 money supply increases more than it has historically. I'm only zoomed in right now up until 2002. Let's go all the way back to 1990. If you look all the way back to the 80s and 90s, here's the 70, right? You can see how much money supply was growing steadily. We hit the dot-com bubble, that burst. We saw an increase in the amount of money being created. The housing crisis, we saw a steeper increase. And then last year, now we see the 2020 year with a massive, almost vertical supply of money that was created. And you can see that curve now is going much higher as in hockey stick. So what this is showing you is this an indicator of how much money is being created, which you can translate into how much inflation is existing in the economy during this given time. Now I want to look at one more important chart, because this chart shows us how much, this chart proves to us that more money is being created ever in history at a faster rate than has ever been created in history. Well, where is that money going to, though? That's the big question here. Where is that money going to? Because we all know about the wealth gap that exists today. And it is true that the top 0.01% own about 90% of the wealth in the U.S. and the rest of us, the bottom 99%, even the what we consider higher upper middle class, we're still sharing almost about 10% of the overall supply of money. This next chart here is called the velocity of money, the velocity of M2 money. So what velocity means is the movement, right? The movement of something, velocity. If it's high velocity, there's a lot of movement. If there's low velocity, there's a little movement. So this is showing the velocity of M2, otherwise known as velocity of the money supply. So this says out of all the dollars that are circulating in the economy, out of all the US dollars, how much is it moving? How many people are buying goods and services with it? How many people are spending? In order for the velocity to be high with the money supply, people need to be spending, money needs to be changing hands, and this is a good indicator of how healthy the economy is. You want to see a higher velocity at times because that means that your money is now circulating through the economy, it's working efficiently, right? But what do we see here? We see from 2000, really the housing crisis. So from 2008 on, the velocity of money has been slowly decreasing year over year over year. And it's a drop off into 2020, and now it's the lowest it's ever been. Again, this velocity of money, I have it zoomed into 2002. But if we come back, you can see that historically, this is 95, right? This goes all the way back to the 70s. We are at the lowest point of velocity of money, I think historically, ever since probably going back to the 30s, 1930s. So what does this mean, though? This means that more money is being created by the Federal Reserve Bank than ever in history. However, it's not being circulated throughout the economy, right? It's not moving hands. How is it that so much money can be created, yet it's not circulating at all in the economy? This is where the wealth gap comes into play. So this is a very important part to understand here. What's happening in the United States right now and abroad, it's a systemic issue. It's not even necessarily a political issue. It's a systemic issue. When we work and operate off of a debt-based economy like we have, the people that are at the top have first access to the money, the new money that's created. And those are government officials, those are big businesses, big lobbyists, the wealthy, right? The top 0.01%, like I was talking about. Well, as more of that money is being created through policies that are intended for good nature to help people, help mainstream Americans, help the unemployed, help this and that, the rich are getting first access to that money. And what's happening is that it's not circulating from there on. So it's literally being funneled into the pockets of the rich, and it's never hitting Main Street America. That is proven through those two charts that I just showed you. M2 money supply showing that more money is being created than ever in history, and the velocity of money showing that that money isn't even moving. This is why we're seeing billionaires earning $50 billion in a year. This is why Jeff Bezos has become, the world's richest man. In a year in COVID, I believe he was able to rake in an extra 10, 20, 30 billion dollars for his net worth. This is why, and it's a systemic issue. It's not necessarily a political issue here. That's the important thing to remember. So, but what does this mean? What this means is that everyone is going to have to start preparing for inflation. Here we see another chart. This is big. U.S. consumers, or another article, U.S. consumers brace for double-digit percentage gains in winter heating bills. This is what everyone is going to need to start preparing for. Everyone needs to understand that the cost of everything in society right now, the cost of your products, the cost of your services, the cost of your electricity, the cost of your heating, your natural gas, the cost of your groceries, the cost of education, the cost of housing, the cost of stocks, the cost of anything that is denominated in US dollars is going to go up. That's how inflation works. That's the basic mathematics of it. Here we can see, we saw over the past month, energy in the UK, heating in the UK has skyrocketed. It's so expensive. They don't have any gasoline. That's coming to the United States next. One of the reasons why I've been creating a lot of content over the last 2 years has been exactly on this topic. I've been trying to prepare my audience for what is happening now. You can go back in my videos. What I've been doing is consolidating all my content down to one channel now, so everyone can see anything that I put out there. But you can go back to my videos on this channel. You can go back to my videos on the Nonconformist. Look up the Nonconformist on YouTube. And I've been reporting on these topics along with a partner of mine for 3 years now. And it's been preparing for inflation. You need to get ready for your money, your dollars to become worth less and less, faster than it's ever happened. And you need to start preparing for higher expenses in anything priced in dollars. How can you best prepare, though? What we see is that through these inflationary times, and this goes back to even World War II with the Weimar Republic, as long as you are holding an asset that is uncorrelated to the US dollar, you then can preserve your wealth through that period of inflation. During World War II and the Great Depression, that was gold. Gold was something where if you held gold through that period, if you held gold in Weimar Germany, and the German mark was going through hyperinflation, and we see this in Zimbabwe and Venezuela, where the money isn't even worth anything. The paper isn't even worth anything anymore. They have to weigh pounds and pounds of paper at the grocery store to buy your goods. But if you held gold through that period, you were able to weather that storm, preserve all of the wealth that you used to have into that over that inflationary period through, and at that time it was about 30 years. And then at the end, at least you can come out with wealth preservation, whereas everyone else got wiped out, right? Everyone that had U.S. or denominated debt in the German mark and the Deutschmark, I think it was called. I apologize, not the German mark. But if you had a reserve, if you had an alternative asset that wasn't correlated, you were able to preserve that wealth. Well, today that is Bitcoin. One of the reasons why I'm so passionate on Bitcoin is because Bitcoin is a fixed supply form of money. It is a deflationary form of money. Unlike the dollar, no one can ever create any more Bitcoin. It is in the code. It cannot be changed. It is there permanently. Bitcoin is arguably better than gold in the sense that gold does not have a fixed supply. Gold's inflationary supply is based on how much more gold is being created or dug up out of the ground by the gold miners. Whereas Bitcoin does have an inflationary supply. So, what I have been promoting and what I have been preaching and educating on is the importance of diversifying into Bitcoin as we go forward, starting from here on out, October 14th going on forward. By saving in Bitcoin, what you're doing is you're hedging against inflation. And you can tell this because you look at the price of Bitcoin. Bitcoin has gone from $10,000 a year and a half ago to $58,000 today, right? So that amount of increase in dollars, if you were holding Bitcoin that whole time, you've hedged against inflation. It doesn't matter if US dollars, if everything in dollars are going up, if your cost of bread and your cost of groceries are going up in dollars, because you're holding Bitcoin, an alternative fixed form of money that is making money in Bitcoin. Because as more dollars are created, the price of Bitcoin goes up, just like we should be seeing in gold, but we don't see today. So by saving in Bitcoin, what you're doing is you're preserving your wealth through this inflationary period. You are doing what those that were smart in the early 20th century, in the early 1900s, did to preserve their wealth through that inflationary period. The Fed has told us that this is no longer transitory. Inflation is here to start. This is just the beginning of it. Now, it's important that you understand it now because you can start saving now to prepare for what's to come in the coming months and unfortunately in years to come. This isn't anything that's going to stop now. I'm expecting that we're going to be going through, we could be going through a 10-year period for sure, 10 to 15-year period of inflation with fiat currencies, which is going to lead to their collapse. And I put out a really good video on central bank digital currencies and how the Fed might create one that I published last year. It's on my YouTube channel. You can go into the Wrap Report and find it that way. But that looks like what is next is central bank digital currencies. So the Fed getting ready to launch a digital dollar that they will replace the dollar with once it actually does collapse. So that's today's Wrap Report. Again, inflation no longer transitory, here to stay. We've been talking about it here, or I've been talking about it on this channel now for well over a year and a half, 2 years. So it's actually happening now. It's no longer a myth or anything like that. I provided you with some information how to prepare. If you really enjoy the content here, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'm having everything under this YouTube channel now because, quite frankly, I just do not have the time to distribute content across multiple channels. So if you go into my playlist, you're going to find everything I'm doing between Tactical Pause with the meditation, the breathing exercises, wellness, Wraps Caps Mushroom Farm, the mushroom farm I have here in the Wrap Report, where I'm covering macroeconomics, finance, Bitcoin, and also a Bitcoin educational channel for everything that is related to Bitcoin education. All right, everyone, if you like this video, please like it, share it with someone who you love so dearly because this topic is so important at this time. These inflationary parts in history ruin families. Inflation is a hidden devil. It's something that people don't really understand, and it comes up every now and then in society, in history. But quite frankly, if you're not aware and you do not prepare, anything and everything that you've worked for and saved for in your life can be lost in the matter of days or months. And if you don't believe me, ask anyone who's Venezuelan. Ask anyone who's Greek that was in Greece during their crisis in 2014. Ask anyone in Zimbabwe. These are people that have worked their entire lives, that had a savings where they thought it was going to be worth something in retirement, only to find out that they've lost all the value in that money in just a matter of a year or so. So, all right, everyone, that's going to be it for today. I hope you really enjoyed it. Make sure you love one another through this period. Wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you guys. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next episode.